with these loans and guarantees. Not to mention, Mr. Speaker, number 4, the assumption underpinning the debt management strategy, and of course, an analysis of the sustainability of both actual and potential public debt. The resolution of the House on the report of the medium-term debt management strategy shall serve as a foundation for determining the appropriate limits on proposed domestic and external borrowing. Additionally, it shall inform the approval of the budget policy statement report. Mr. Speaker, the 2025 MTDS outlines the following strategy. A gross financing ratio of 25 to 75 for external and domestic borrowing respectively, and 2, a net financing strategy of 35 to 65 for external and domestic finance respectively. Mr. Speaker, this underscores the continued reliance on domestic market as the primary source of financing for fiscal deficits over the medium term. As at the end of January 2025, the total stock of public and publicly guaranteed debt stood at 11.02 trillion shillings, equivalent, Mr. Speaker, to 65.7% of the GDP, up from 10.58 trillion, which was equivalent to the same 65.7% of the GDP in June 2024. This figure is projected to rise further to 13 trillion by June 2027. Consequently, debt servicing costs are expected to increase to 1.97 trillion by June 2025 and further to 2.4 trillion by June 2027. Additionally, debt service payments, including interest and redemption payments, are projected to remain elevated, averaging 60% of the total income. This underscores the tightening fiscal space and highlights the urgent need for a robust debt management strategy aimed at minimizing costs and mitigating the risk associated with high debt distress levels. Mr. Speaker, in reviewing the 2025 MTDS, my committee engaged with the key stakeholders, including the Commission on Revenue Allocation, the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, the Council of Governors, the County Assemblies Forum, Budgeti Hub, the Institute of Public Finance, the Institute of Social Accountability, Office of the Auditor General, Okoa Uchumi, Mr. Kelvin Ronyo, and the Institute of Economic Affairs. The committee held a total of 10 sittings while processing this MTDS. Additionally, in adherence to Article 201A of the Constitution, the Senate conducted public participation on the 2025 MTDS through a call for submission of memoranda. Mr. Speaker, sir, arising from these consultative engagements, the committee made several recommendations which included the following. 1, noting that as of June 2024, Kenya's public debt stood at 10.58 trillion, equivalent to 63% in present value. Terms exceeding Public Finance Management Act frameworks of PV to GDP ratio of 55% by 8% points, the National Treasury should submit quarterly reports to Parliament detailing the progress made towards compliance with the set threshold as contained in the Public Finance Management Act. 2, that the National Treasury, Central Bank of Kenya, and Controller Budget should fully automate the withdrawal of debt service payments from the Consolidated Fund by 31st May 2025. And that additionally, an interagency report on the implementation status of these recommendations should be submitted to Parliament 15 days after the 31st of May 2025. 3, that to enhance financial controls, improve accuracy and timelines of public debt statistics, and strengthen decision-making for greater transparency and accountability, the National Treasury should integrate the public debt management system with Integrated Financial Management System, IFMIS, by May 31st, 2025, and submit a report to Parliament within 15 days of implementation. 4, that to enhance transparency and accountability in anticipated increase in domestic borrowing, the National Treasury should within 60 days, 1, establish a working committee to develop criteria for assessing the effective utilization of borrowed funds by ministries, departments, and agencies, and establish the Registrar of Government Securities in accordance with Section 55 of the Public Management Finance Act. And that 2, it should ensure that the debt register records comprehensive details on the utilization of borrowed funds, including specific breakdown of projects financed through the proceeds of infrastructure bonds. E, that the National Treasury should establish a multi-agency committee comprising of representatives from the National Treasury, the Central Bank of Kenya, and the Controller Budget to review the public debt procurement process and, Madam Speaker, assess the utilization of borrowed funds. The committee should report to the Senate within 60 days. To mitigate the impact of high debt service costs, the National Treasury should ensure efficient resource utilization, prioritize investments in high-impact sectors, and enhance the timely implementation of projects and programs. Allow me, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, to make a few remarks on the financial recommendations that we made as a committee. That the fiscal deficit target for the medium term is approved and set at 4.6% of the GDP for the financial year 2025-2026, and at 3.8% of the GDP for the financial year 2026-2027, and at 3.5% of the GDP for the financial year 2027-2028, in line with the fiscal consolidation path, and that the country's borrowing strategy is approved at 35% for the net external borrowing and 65% for the net domestic borrowing, as contained in the 2025 midterm debt management strategy. Finally, Madam Speaker, I'd like to appreciate stakeholders who appreciated our work and appeared before the committee or submitted memoranda on the 2025 MTDS, and I also appreciate members of the Committee on Finance and Budget for their commitment and dedication to complete the task. I also wish to appreciate the Office of the Speaker and the Office of the Clerk for facilitating the committee in executing its mandate. Lastly, Madam Speaker, I request senators to approve the committee's report on this 2025 MTDS. And before I invite to be seconded, I want to appreciate the arrival of the leader of the youth in the Senate, the distinguished senator from Siaya, Dr. Oburu Dinga, aged 84 years old. Welcome to this great meeting. And also, Madam Speaker, I want to welcome back after a 2-week hiatus from the Senate, the leader of the majority. I don't know whether he was reading for a master's at Strathmore College or he was reading for a PhD. I encourage you, if you don't have a PhD, you quickly do so, because some of us who are properly educated, we have decided to profile those who don't have PhDs. Madam Speaker, I wish to invite the senator for Nairobi nominated, Senator Tabitha Maureen Mutinda, to second this.
Thank you, Senator, but just hold on, Senator Tabitha. And I don't know whether you have now provided all of us who have not achieved the PhD. We hope not, but let me give a communication from the chair on visiting teachers and pupils from Golden Plains Academy, Kitengela in Kajiado County. Honorable Senators, I would like to acknowledge the presence in the public gallery this afternoon of visiting teachers and pupils from Golden Plains Academy, Kitengela in Kajiado County. The delegation comprises 8 teachers and 41 pupils who are in the Senate for a one-day academic exposition. Honorable Senators, in our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming to Parliament, visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. I thank you. And I want to request the Majority Leader, who needs to do some work today, to welcome this school, together with Senator Tabitha, when you take up to support the motion.
I don't know why the majority whip, Madam Speaker, is animated this afternoon, and why he wants to announce to the students that I haven't been around for a while. But it's only last week, and I've been coming evenings after class at 5 o'clock, Madam Speaker. So I want to join you in welcoming these pupils and teachers from Golden Plains Academy, Kitengela in Kajiado County. There are 8 teachers and 41 pupils who are in the Senate for one-day academic exposition. Madam Speaker, I know it's always an interesting time when students get an opportunity to watch the House. It's unfortunate that by the time these students arrived, many of our colleagues have already checked out for the day. But it doesn't mean that they are not working. We have, immediately after this wall, there's what is referred to as a Senator's Lounge, where many of our colleagues follow debates from the House, and if there is a need for them to come and respond to something, they walk back into the House. So it doesn't mean that if you see the chairs empty, that it goes without a fact that senators are not around. I can tell you that had you been here at 2:30, the House was nearly full house, Madam Speaker. So I hope they get to interact with the senators, learn, and get to understand what's happening. What the minority whip was doing, just to inform them of the procedure that we're going through, was moving actually a motion. A committee, that is a committee which he sits in, Committee on Budget and Finance, has sat down, considered the report of Kenya's debt situation from the Treasury, and now they are sending a report back to the House. So what he's doing is called moving a report, after which it will be seconded and tabled before the House for debate, after which members will vote. So that's one of the many things that we do in this particular house. I wish them well in their studies, Mr. Speaker, because these are our leaders of our country presently and in the future. And for those who want to pursue a future in leadership, political leadership in this country, Madam Speaker, they're welcome to do so. This is a very fulfilling profession. Never mind all the difficulties that come with it. I wish you well in all that you're up to and in your journey back to Kajiado. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Majority Leader Senator Aaron Cheriot, Kericho County. I want to also give another communication from the chair on visiting teachers and students from Diaine Girls Secondary School, Mokorene constituency in Nyeri County. Honorable Senators, I would like to acknowledge the presence in the public gallery this afternoon of visiting teachers and students from Diaine Girls Secondary School in Mokorene constituency in Nyeri County. The delegation comprises 2 teachers and 36 students who are in the Senate for a one-day academic exposition. Honorable Senators, in our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. Thank you. I will request Senator Tabitha, when she's seconding this motion, to first acknowledge and receive those students from Diaine Girls Secondary School, Mokorene constituency in Nyeri County.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I take this opportunity to welcome the students from Nyeri County, that is Diaine Girls Secondary School, and also not forgetting the other school from Kitengela. One thing that makes you all to be on that level of education is because you're all students. I always say that education is the only thing that nobody will ever take it away from you. The knowledge and the skills that you gain while in school are very important. Nobody will take that from you. And I always encourage students, enjoy your moment in your learning institutions, because you're not going to be in high school and in primary throughout your life. Our work is to legislate, to represent, and to oversight. We have a speaker. As we speak right now, we have Madam Speaker, who's like the principal or the head mistress of the institution. We have the leadership of the house, the way you have deans in school. And we sit as members. So it's like another institution which has laws that we adhere to, the same way you have laws. So I will encourage you to enjoy your studies. The sky is the limit. You can as well be here today. The people of, the students of Kajiado County, I actually sit next to your senator, but he had to leave for some other work. The students of Nyeri County, behind sits the senator of Nyeri County. I'll pass my regards. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for that opportunity. I take this now opportunity to do second my colleague, Dr. Senior Boni Alale, on the issue of the medium-term strategy that we as a committee have really deliberated on it. And I'm happy to say that the CS, Honorable Badi, was able to appear before the committee today. And we were able to get into some of the issues definitely pertaining the issue of debt, which I think when I was doing my contribution on the BPS, I touched on it because they interrelate. We deal with these two matters of BPS and MTDS concurrently, Madam Speaker. And the issue that we really focused on was to try and understand the increment of the debt as compared to the GDP, which is currently at 65.7. Madam Speaker, this was a concern because last year, this was capped at 55.5%. But the minister was able to state before the committee that actually this has reduced from 72% to where it is at 65.7% of GDP. It's been a reduction, which has been brought about by strengthening of the Kenya shilling versus the dollar. And this has been able to save us a whopping 24 billion as a country, money that is able to transfer to the schools for capitation, among other budgets, Madam Speaker. The issue that we were also able to raise, as I mentioned earlier, Madam Speaker, was the issue of the domestic borrowing at 65% and the external borrowing at 35%, Madam Speaker, putting in mind the position of the private sector because of the interest rate, bank interest rates at the banks. Madam Speaker, on the issue of debts, we also related on the issue of pending bills, both at the county level and at the national level, Madam Speaker, because we have quite a chunk. And this issue of pending bill, as you know, Madam Speaker, is a thorny issue. We were able to ask the minister the amount of non-performing loans as far as the issue of pending bills are concerned. Kenyans, the way they are suffering, they are not able to pay their loans simply because their supplies have also not been paid. And each and every year, we are budgeting. So we were able to ask the Treasury also, the same thing we also asked the COG to push to reduce the issue of pending bills so that money can be able to circulate. Most people are stuck, most people, business people are actually stuck because of the issue of pending bills, yet services have been rendered or goods have been delivered. The issue of the cash basis versus the accrual basis of accounting is an issue that as a committee we were able to also deliberate on the importance of the accrual accounting system because as we speak, like the counties and even the national government has been using the cash basis system, then which brings about the audit issues, Madam Speaker. The issue of the debt, where are we with the debt? How much has been borrowed? How much has been paid? What are the timelines for payment? What are the interest rates? What are the terms and conditions? What was agreed and all that? This needs to come to light. As I said earlier, there was a committee that the president had proposed last year, which brought a lot of politics. But the minister was able to promise the committee that through the Office of the Auditor General, this report should be tabled and we should be able to be more informed on the level of or how much debt has been borrowed, what is expected to be borrowed, because as we continue doing budgets, Madam Speaker, you know very well, we are prospecting. We do not have the actuals, and hence now the borrowing comes in. But borrowing, looking at it on the positive perspective, then our credibility is positive. Hence, we are able to get the approvals for the loan, or we are able to be supported. But we also need to ensure that we prioritize, as I said earlier, on the human resource capital. If the human resource is demoralized, if the human resource is not paid their dues on time, especially when you look at the health issues on the health sector, then you know, the nation is not able to progress and achieve most of its goals, as have been said or set as far as the different dockets are concerned, Madam Speaker. So, all said, Madam Speaker, I urge the members be able to support our report, and also, because of the timeline issue, as I said earlier, we are behind time as far as the BPS is concerned, as far as the passage of this MTDS is concerned, and I would want to urge colleagues that before the end of this week, through the able leadership of the Majority Leader Aaron Cheriot and our counterpart Mazayo, to be able to ensure that we pass these two motions. Otherwise, then we are not within the timelines. But I've also informed the House that we are having PFM amendments to be able to increase the timeline, because the time is normally too short, and these are very, very critical issue. And lastly, before I forget, Madam Speaker, just to mention that we've noticed also as a committee that some budgets have been set at the national level, especially on the Ministry of Health. More funding has been able to move, and you look at the specific funding, you realize these are projects that should be done within the county level, Madam Speaker. With all those many and few, I do second.
Thank you very much, Senator Tabitha. Honorable Senators, I propose the question that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2025 Midterm Debt Management Strategy laid on the table of the Senate on Wednesday, 12 March 2025. Thank you. I want to now invite the senators to contribute to this motion, beginning with the majority leader, Senator Cheriot Aaron, Kericho County.
I thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a very important report that comes from the Committee on Budget and Finance, and it's a pity, Madam Speaker, that it's being moved late in the evening when most members are out, but I hope that each senator gets an opportunity to speak on this particular issue, because this is a very fundamental issue. And personally, Madam Speaker, I've been very, very consistent on my call for a better management of our debt situation as a country. From the days last Parliament, Madam Speaker, when we raised first the nominal figure, I think from 6 to 10, I oppose that move, Madam Speaker, for reasons that I'll speak onto, and why I feel the Budget and Finance Committee, though they have done a good work, can do better on this particular issue, because it's not just a ticking of the box when Treasury lays before the House the debt management strategy that they want to bring before this particular Parliament. We are placed with serious responsibility as a legislature and the institution of accountability, where we can call on the Treasury and ask them, Madam Speaker, to perhaps do better on many areas. This issue of debt is not a very simple issue. It is a serious issue, Madam Speaker, which, if not properly managed, can lead the country into economic collapse. This is a threat that we've lived with for a while. If you take time, Madam Speaker, to read the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto, you will see that the issue of debt featured quite prominently. And it is described there as a perfect economic storm, what Kenya finds itself in, that we still are tinkering on or about 70%. I think from the figure that they've given, to be specific here, is that we are currently at actually 65.7% of the GDP, Madam Speaker, which is not a very interesting figure. Remember when we passed the amendment that I now supported to a percentage, and we explained the justification there in 2023, if I'm not wrong, Madam Speaker, the argument was that that is a more scientific and more accurate than having it in a nominal figure, Madam Speaker, as such that as the economy continues to grow, then you keep your debt at a sustainable level. You know, because of the situation that we are in, the fiscal space that we find ourselves in, Madam Speaker, it is not possible not to borrow. Yet you must still also do so responsibly. Because if today we were to say that you are not borrowing any shilling, Madam Speaker, because I've seen people ignorantly argue so many times in public spaces, Madam Speaker, then perhaps debt repayment might be the only thing that we will be able to do, because unfortunately it's the first charge on our consolidated funds, Madam Speaker. With a debt repayment of close to 1.6 trillion, Madam Speaker, then you'll be left with less than 600 trillion to fund counties, you haven't paid salaries and all that. Therefore, let's not even have that conversation, because it's totally impossible today in this economy not to borrow and fail to default, because you'll have to choose one thing. If you don't borrow, then one of the two most important charges on our consolidated account, which is debt repayment and payment of salaries, one will have to give way. Either we will have to default on debt repayment or default on salaries to all the people that earn from the Kenyan taxpayer, which includes doctors, teachers, police officers, civil servants, Madam Speaker. It's not a very interesting situation. And therefore, we have always requested that this debt management strategy be anchored on our fiscal deficit, Madam Speaker, as a good measure of whether what we are doing is right, Madam Speaker, or wrong. There must be a clear demonstration that there is an effort to consolidate fiscally so that we continue to reduce our deficit year on year once we do our budget, Madam Speaker, to a point where you are not borrowing more than the previous year, Madam Speaker, but are borrowing barely enough to meet what is most critical, but also seek ways through which you can grow your own economy and pay up on your major debts, Madam Speaker. In fact, many people sometimes discuss about this administration and what has been its biggest achievement. While there is debate about the reforms that have been initiated in the agriculture sector, which are stellar, Madam Speaker, and you go today to public gatherings with coffee farmers, with wheat farmers, Madam Speaker, they appreciate the interventions that have been made that, Madam Speaker, continue to show positive results. But a keen student of economic management, Madam Speaker, will point out to the fact that avoiding a default and how we have succeeded the last 2 years to pay our debts in time, Madam Speaker, still ranks extremely high as the biggest achievement of this administration. At the coming into power of this administration, Madam Speaker, a default was imminent. In fact, if you recall the conversation at that particular time in the political circles, it was a matter of when, not if. In fact, there were predictions, and it had been said this administration will not last more than 3 months. It was on account of the fact that people knew the landmines that had been left by the previous administration, Madam Speaker, where everybody was certain that we were going to default, then we were going to go into a financial crisis, Madam Speaker, and a near collapse of our financial systems. How that has not happened remains to be for the history books. And while this is a conversation that is perhaps beyond the understanding of many average people who, for one reason or the other, may not be able to comprehend or follow through what this has been about, Madam Speaker, it remains to be one of the key achievements of this administration. Repaying of the Eurobond in good time, Madam Speaker, and the near $1 billion repayments actually of the, I think the SGR loan, and there's another one syndicated from one of the commercial institutions, I forget the exact name at this particular point, that has happened in the last 6 months, Madam Speaker, is something worth remembering. Therefore, the question that we should ask ourselves as a House, as we consider this report on the midterm debt management strategy, is what is it that we are doing to ensure, Madam Speaker, that in future we shall have a more sustainable economy without appearing it to grow it actually to levels beyond our repayment abilities in the near future. And if we keep on shifting goalposts, the way I see it being done, Madam Speaker, we will find ourselves in a very difficult. Everybody will keep on kicking the can down the road. Then it will get to a point, Madam Speaker, where it will no longer be possible to either repay debt and continue thriving. Therefore, I want to urge our colleagues in Budget and Finance Committee to take this work extremely seriously. I have read through this particular report, and I'm impressed by what they've done, but there's a lot more that they can do, Madam Speaker. Number one, pointing out on things which I feel the Budget and Finance Committee needs to lead this House into a conversation on. The country must be informed at every given budget-making season, including the BPS season that we are in, is how well are we reducing on the fiscal deficit. The last 2 years, is it from 4%? There was a promise that in 26-27, which is the next financial, 25-26, was going to drop beyond 3%. Is it possible, especially with the events of last year, June, happening, where government is not able to realize sufficient revenue, and also with the continuing growth on public expenditure, on critical expenditure, Madam Speaker. You know, sometimes our newspapers choose to be very simplistic and say, oh, there's this 3 billion that is being used for renovation and this or the other. While that is an important point, it's not the main point in a budget conversation. In a budget that continues to grow, and I think the BPS statement this year was at 4.3, Madam Speaker, the fine print needs to be checked against what is it that continues to consume public expenditure, Madam Speaker. If it is salaries, Madam Speaker, is it sustainable in this day and age to continue with the year-on increase that almost all public servants continue to earn in a depressed economy such as ours, Madam Speaker? Is it also sustainable, Madam Speaker, the kind of expenditure that we see from certain key sectors of the economy? Education, of course, is the largest consumer at almost 670 billion in the BPS that I have seen. What is the saving that needs to be made there? Why am I focusing my conversation on the fiscal deficit, Madam Speaker? Because it is the only known measure that will help us appreciate the balance of revenue vis-a-vis expenditure, and therefore the difference with what we are going to borrow to meet the gap there in between, Madam Speaker. If we continue to borrow in figures of beyond 4 or 5%, Madam Speaker, basically what we are doing is that we may appear to be okay now, but it will eventually catch up with us. And this is a challenge that I want to pass on to the Budget and Finance Committee, that if possible, because I know before you, there is presently an amendment to ensure that I think we move the year. Remember when we moved from nominal terms to percentage of the GDP on the debt anchor, Madam Speaker, we actually set 2028 as a year of moving it downwards. And it's a figure that you're supposed to grow towards. There's now a proposal before Budget and Finance Committee to take it, I think, to 2030. I'm not sure, and I can't see any member of that committee in the House to remind us. While I am willing to be persuaded, Madam Speaker, by the Treasury on why that particular reality needs to be made, there are other things that it needs to be adopted with. And I've just noticed that the Vice Chair of Budget and Finance Committee is here. I hope she's paying attention, Madam Speaker, because if you are to grant that, the only way through which I can support such an amendment, Madam Speaker, is if there is a tightening of the fiscal deficit space. It must be accompanied together with it. There must be a clear path that demonstrates and says that, okay, we can grant it to you up to 2030, but demonstrate to us financial year after the other, a figure cast in law. Because I know how these budget things work, Madam Speaker, and we've been around this parliament for a while, to understand that so long as figures remain just a discussion in report, they are never going to be observed. This is perhaps the time that we must bring into the national conversation the fiscal deficit and have it put into law, Madam Speaker, so that we know in 25, 26, this is the figure beyond which we cannot be allowed to borrow beyond. In 26, 27, and that figure must studiously come down, because there's a scientific way within which you achieve that 55% by 2030, Madam Speaker. This is just 5 years that we are talking about. It's not a very long time, the way people want to put it. And if we are not careful and we do not tighten the path, Madam Speaker, we will find ourselves to be in this house, God granting us life and citizens granting us the opportunity to be here, and we will be here in 2029 discussing how to move again that 55% to 2034, unless Parliament did its work with diligence. Therefore, I hope as Budget and Finance Committee considers that proposal from Treasury, Madam Speaker, the only way, and this is my argument, as a representative of the people and as somebody who has keenly followed this conversation over the last 2 terms of Parliament, as Kenya continues to struggle with its debt situation, Madam Speaker, that I expect that it will be anchored in law alongside the percentage of debt anchor at 55%, so that it is